So I guess I guess I should give that slow enough for you. There are three types of authority in the church, colon. Administrative, comma, policy, and final. The pastor teacher sets the policy. Delegates administrative authority. And of course, has the final authority, period. I was talking this weekend to an old high school individual who had looked me up. It's been 40 years or whatever since high school. He got in contact with me, and he was the individual actually that evangelized me. And his father was a Baptist minister, right? And he's not Baptist anymore. He's got out of being Baptist. It was interesting because we were talking about churches and the hierarchy of churches, right? And he recognized that one of the problems with the Southern Baptist Church that he was associated with as a kid is they had the hierarchy, and his dad was responsible to report to the Southern Baptist Conference, and responsible for what he was teaching. There is no such higher authority. The pastor teacher, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, responds directly to, okay, God. God is my Bible of me except for God. And that's a scary thought, and that's why you have the fear of the Lord concept. Okay? But the idea is that he has the final authority. There is no board of deacons that's higher than the authority. That's the way some churches are. They're built upside down. They have a deacon board that dictates to the pastor teacher. Okay, that's not a proper structure, and you don't have a structure where you have a pastor teacher responding to a cardinal or a bishop or anything like that. Okay, it's pastor teacher and then to God. Point 8. Remember, comma, although the deacons have administrative authority, comma, that authority is checked or subject to that of the pastor, period. They cannot dictate policy. They can only implement it through administration. I know I'm beating this to death, but the reason is that there are churches that are popping up using a new organizational development model, right, where they have multiple pastors, or they have pastors that are associated with other ministries, right? You have the youth pastor, you have the music pastor, you have the teenage girls pastor, you have the all of these things. There's only one authority of church in church, and that is the pastor. Okay? And so what that means when we're looking at it from the standpoint of this verse, yourself means you have to subordinate to the pastor. Okay? If you can't subordinate to the pastor, if you can't subordinate to me, then I'm not your right pastor teacher. You need to go find someone that you can subordinate to. And if you say, well, I can't subordinate myself to anybody, then you need to look at your arrogance and figure out whether you're actually going to be trying to be a mature believer at some point in your life. Because you'll never get there if you don't submit to somebody. Okay? So you have to understand that concept. And there have been some people that have said, I can't subordinate to you, and they left. That's fine. If you can't, go find some place where you can. Okay? So this concept of one final authority is being destroyed throughout not only the churches, but throughout our society in general, right? But it's the only thing that works. It's supposed to work in the military, right? That's why you have the hierarchy in the military. Okay, the individual has a responsibility to get something done, so he's given the authority, and he has people. Unless you have no stripes, he has people underneath him. As soon as you have one stripe, you're above somebody. Okay, so it works that way. Okay, it's supposed to work that way in business. I went through, Motorola went through this period where they had these self-forming teams. It was the latest thing, right? And so, people were supposed to get together and they dictated their own kind of work, and nobody was. It seemed to really for anybody, right? And consequently, nothing ever got done. Okay? Or whatever got done was the wrong thing. It wasn't what was actually needed. It wasn't until, and it was kind of funny because the guy that was implementing it was a vice president, and I noticed he didn't give up his title of vice president, right? And he had on the org chart, he had all these little circles that were, self-forming teams, right? And there was no hierarchy, quote unquote, except all of the circles reported to him. And someone made the comment, "What self-forming team are you part of?" Right? But it doesn't work. Organizations that try to have multiple authorities fail. Organizations also associated with mom and dad. Okay, there's one authority in the family. That's dad. Okay, they work together as a team, or they should work together as a team. But when it comes down, who's the authority in the family? It's dad. Dad's the disciplinarian, and dad's the authority. And kids are smart. Kids can figure it out that if there's no authority, if there's two authorities, mom and dad, okay, you go to the one that's going to give you the right answer when you got a question to ask, right? You want to go someplace and dad's going to say no, you go to mom, okay? And if she says yes, then it's between her and dad now, right? And I'm going to go wherever I wanted to go because mom told me I could, right? Dad can't come back in and say no, you're not going to. Well, mom told me you work it out between mom. That's not my problem, right? So the idea is that there's one authority in organizations, and in the church, it's the pastor-teacher. Okay, we'll get off of that, but that was the first part of the phrase. The verse obviously was subordinating yourself to a single authority. Point 9. Next, Peter is going to expand the scope of responsibility for the congregation. As we noted, he first commanded the submission to the pastor-teacher, and again, because without the submission, the believer can't grow, and therefore can't fulfill his next command. But as we see, this next command is expanded because it's going to include the pastor-teacher. So we have next, Peter is going to expand the scope of responsibility for the congregation. And the next command is, quote, all of you, comma, with reference to one another, comma, clothe yourselves with genuine humility, period, end quote. The next command is all of you, with reference to one another, clothe yourselves with genuine humility. Subpoint A. First, comma, note that this command is for all of you. This includes everyone in the local church, including the pastor, period. So this is for all believers. The pastor, I have the responsibility to clothe myself with genuine humility as well. I have to grow. I have to continue to study. Okay? I have to continue to review and get information. One of the largest, parts of putting together all this information is actually reviewing and going through different information, going through and studying different concepts, not just going directly to the Word and going just the Word. Okay, you've got to go into the Word. You've got to get the information as it comes out of the Word. But then I have a bunch of different references that I also go to. I'm constantly reviewing and reading theology. I'm reading history of the church fathers. I'm reading information associated with various doctrines and concepts, so that I can together and present it to you. So I've got to grow. I also listen to other pastors. And I have a pastor, it's kind of interesting. I have a meeting. I wouldn't necessarily call it a learning session, although there's quite a bit of information that comes from it on Fridays. That's taking place. That's taught by the current chancellor at the Schaeffer Theological Seminary. It's a pastor meeting that happens on Fridays. It's that Larry invited me to. So it's kind of interesting. Okay, so I have to clothe myself too. Okay? So it's all believers. Subpoint B. Then Peter emphasizes the scope of this command. Peter emphasizes the scope of this command with the phrase, comma, quote, with reference to one another, period, end quote. And that's the word order in the Greek. So I tried to keep it. Most of the general translators use a little bit different. They have, should have written it down. They have, oops, chapter 5. I'm going, wait a minute. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the They have you younger men, and I told you about the younger men being improper. Likewise, be subject to your elders, and all of you clothe yourselves with humility toward one another. They have it at the end, but Peter actually has it in the beginning to emphasize it a little bit, right? I didn't underline it, but he has it in the beginning to emphasize it. So he has the with reference to one another first before he says, humble yourselves, okay? So Peter emphasizes the scope of the command with the phrase with reference to one another. Continue the point. In other words, comma, this command is so that each one of us can have a proper relationship to every other one of us, period. No one is to be excluded, period. See, so Peter, God through Peter, is giving us information associated with the congregation as a whole. We are to have a relationship with each other. We're to have a relationship with each other that's associated with genuine humility. And remember, genuine humility, the real definition of genuine humility is grace orientation. We're supposed to have a grace-oriented attitude towards each other. We harbor no mental attitude sins towards each other. We don't gossip. We don't have sins of the tongue. And, of course, we don't have any overt sins. Okay? But we're supposed to have this relationship with each other. And it's hard sometimes for a doctrinal church, particularly a small doctrinal church, well, even large, I guess I shouldn't say the size. Sometimes it's hard for a doctrinal church because we do emphasize the privacy of the believer all the time, right? To where people will want to just, they come in and they just sit there, right? They don't want to be noticed, right? And that's okay because nobody around them wants to notice them, right? It's like, oh, I'm not supposed to notice them. I'm supposed to give them their privacy, right? And so you don't have this relationship. But the true congregation is one that's, mature and maturing believers have a relaxed mental attitude towards each other. You can interact with each other without destroying anybody's privacy, right? You don't have to go poking into their personal lives and getting into privacy. You can, interact with this genuine humility, this grace attitude, grace orientation, have a relaxed mental attitude. One of the things you'll notice is in a congregation that's functioning properly like that, you have people with sense of humor. Right? And people make jokes without anybody else getting upset and walking away. Oh, that person, just insulted me. No, he didn't. He was trying to be funny. It didn't come out right, but it's okay, right? Take it for what it was, right? Don't go getting all upset and getting your nose out of joint. That's not this grace orientation and genuine humility towards one another. Okay. Subpoint C. Then once again, Peter uses a reflexive. When he states, comma, quote, clothe yourself, end quote. A reflexive is a grammatical way of saying the action reflects back on you. You got to do it yourself. Okay? So clothe yourselves. So we have the believer has to, excuse me. Then once again, Peter uses a reflexive when he states clothe yourselves. Continue the point. The believer has to perform this action himself. No one can force him to have genuine humility. It is only arrived at through the study and inculcation of Bible doctrine. Inculcation, Inculcation, and that means to instill, to have an idea or habit, okay, and it's to instill by persistent instruction. In other words, it's inculcated by having it taught to you over and over and over and over again, like sometimes I get really accused of. Okay, I'm inculcating you. I look at my wife like, oh, not again. Yeah, sorry. Okay, through the study and the inculcation of Bible doctrine. This is a word. Excuse me. This word is a constative aorist. Which means that you are to have this attitude each and every time you interact with another believer. Subpoint D. Am I going too fast? Okay, subpoint D. And finally in this phrase, comma, quote, or excuse me, in this phrase, comma, there's no quote. So, and finally in this phrase, we have the emphatic phrase, comma, quote, with the genuine humility. And genuine is in pairs of two lines through it, and that whole phrase is underlined, period, end quote. This tells us that this is the mental attitude state of humility that is derived from Bible doctrine. that's what's necessary to interact properly with other believers. You have to do it from the state of mental attitude associated with doctrine. Well, what does that tell you? The mental attitude says that you're supposed to be in the divine dynasphere. You're supposed to have a relaxed mental attitude. You're supposed to have filling of God the Holy Spirit. You're supposed to have it enforced in genuine humility. And you're supposed to have the functional virtues associated with impersonal love toward mankind, with courage towards man and circumstances. Okay? Those kinds of things that are associated with being in the divine dynasphere. This is not, like I said last week, a mental attitude of, oh, shucks, little old me, that kind of humility, right? It's not, oh, gee, I'm going to be so humble, right? I'm going to let people just step on me like I'm some kind of little slug. That's not the way you show humility, okay? Quote, this is having, maintaining a relaxed mental attitude, comma, having impersonal love toward the other believer, comma. Remember, impersonal love is a phrase that was coined by Colonel Theme. It deals with, we have two different types of love. In the Bible, we talk about personal love and impersonal love. And if you look at it from the statement that says, I love you, okay, the I is the subject, love obviously is the verb, and you is the object. Okay, and so one way of doing it is you can do it by, you can think of it from the terms of objective love, which would be I, focusing on the I love you. And that's what we call impersonal love. That's loving someone based on who and what you are. Okay? You are supposed to be moral. You're supposed to be filled with doctrine. You're supposed to be functioning properly. And it doesn't matter what the other person does. Okay? You function properly with regard to them. Okay? Up to and including if you have to separate from them, you separate from them. That doesn't mean you don't have a love relationship. It's impersonal love. You're separating primarily with the understanding that that's the best thing to hopefully get them back into God's plan. By being separated from you, if they have a true love for you, they will realize that they're malfunctioning and they will get back into God's plan with you. So that's the impersonal love. And then you have personal love, which is I love you. Am I saying it the wrong way? Which is I love you, and it's based on the you part. You have to be lovable. That's the love like between a man and a woman or a family, okay, where the individual is lovable, okay, and up to the point where they become unlovable. And if they become unlovable, then you've got to go to impersonal love again. And so you constantly maybe have to flip back and forth. But here we're talking about impersonal love with regard to the congregation. See, the Catholic Church never quite got that concept, and so they had, making the sign of peace, and then also, turn to the neighbor next to you and tell them that you love that you love them, right? And a lot of people couldn't do that. They didn't understand. They didn't understand. I don't even know this person. How can I love them? Okay. Well, they didn't teach impersonal love. You can love someone you don't know with an impersonal love. Treat them with respect. Treat them with who and what, with regard to who and what you are. Okay. So. Okay, so this is maintaining relaxed mental attitude, comma, having impersonal love toward the other believer, comma, knowing your status as a member of the royal family of God. Comma, etc. Period. You're a member of the royal family of God. If they're believers, they're a member of the royal family of God. And you're supposed to be all one big happy family. And you do that with grace orientation. So that's the last sentence. This is an attitude of grace orientation. Period. I'm trying to watch closely. If I get going too fast, you guys will have to tell me to stop because I'm running on pure coffee. I didn't get a whole lot of sleep, so I've got it. I asked Miss if we had the intravenous bag so I could actually attach it, but we apparently don't have that anymore, so just drink it. So we have 11 points to this analysis, and point 11 is actually relatively short, so we're almost through this verse. Point 10. Then Peter gives us the quote from Proverbs 3:34. As it is given in the Septuagint. You can either put LXX, or if you want to spell Septuagint, it's SEPTUAGINT. Okay? Now notice I've tried to maintain, Jack had a good habit of saying from versus of. Okay? This is from Proverbs 3:34. In other words, it's not the exact translation. In the of, if it's of, it means it's coming directly as transliterated from the Hebrew. So this is a from, not an of. slight difference. Okay. Subpoint A. This is an antithetic distich, comma. Those of you that were here when we originally studied Proverbs under Jack, remember that Proverbs is primarily a distich, which is a two-line statement in each line, or two-part statement that makes up the line. Okay, and there was different types. This is an antithetic distich, comma, and now I'm going to tell you what it is, which is a two-phrase statement where the first line states something, and then the second line states the antithesis. But the idea is that both lines together represent a single key thought that is emphasized by the antithetical construction. You know, like the wise son is the joy of his father, and the stupid son is the shame of his mother, right? You know, it gives you the concept that you're supposed to be smart, you're supposed to be wise, you're supposed to be full of doctrine, you're supposed to have that information, right? But they're antithetical, and the antithetical part of it, you know, is you have the wise son, and then you have the stupid son, and the father and the mother, but they're joined together and emphasized. That one point is joined together and emphasized by the construction of the antithesis. Subpoint B. So in our case, the first line states the negative, colon, quote, the God You know what? Let's go back and change it because I keep saying this. We might as well put it in there. The God as opposed to slant makes war on. Let's go ahead and put the makes war on because that's a connotation that's there. And I keep bringing it out, but I didn't translate it that way. So let's go back and translate it that way. The God as opposed to slant makes war on the arrogant ones, period, end quote. Because the sense I have next says, recall that the word opposed has the connotation of makes war on. So let's just go ahead and leave it that way. So is opposed to slant makes war on the arrogant ones. This tells us that God has an attitude is very strong, an attitude that is very strong concerning the arrogant one. Recall that the arrogant one, recall that, quote, the arrogant ones, it was plural, the arrogant ones, end quote, is underlined because it is emphatic. Note that this is not dealing with an overt sin, comma, but a mental attitude sin. Arrogance is a root to a majority of sins. It is emphasized by legalism, comma. Remember, legalism is a very, very insidious type of arrogance. It's one of those that we have to be very careful of. In doctrinal churches, people will get the attitude that, oh, we're better than other believers, right? You know, that's arrogance. That's legalism. Okay? But then you also have other churches that have legalism associated with, ooh, I don't do any of these things that are, you know, that God tells me not to do. I don't drink, I don't play cards, I don't dance, I don't smoke, you know, those kinds of things, you know, and that's legalism, thinking that you're going to be working your way into heaven somehow by being legalistic. Okay? And that's a form of arrogance. But it's a hard form of arrogance for many Christians to understand because it's so many times it's actually what's preached in the various churches. This individual that I was talking to that grew up as a Southern Baptist, one of the things he said to me while we were on the phone is he goes, man, because I didn't realize how much of a legalist I was when I was a Baptist. You know, I didn't drink. I didn't do any of these things. He says, you know, and now I like to have a glass of wine once in a while before I go to bed, right? You know? And I said, yeah, you know, Christ drank wine. Christ made wine. Yeah, no. So he goes, yeah. I said, you know, I didn't realize that kind of legalism. So it took him a while, but he recognized it, right? And that's cool. So we have legalism. It's emphasized by legalism, comma, disorientation to God's grace, comma. The idea that somehow you earn or deserve what God gives you instead of understanding that's grace and you don't earn it or deserve it. Whenever I think of a line like this, I think of you know, one of the movies that I really like at Christmas time, okay, is The Bishop's Wife. And there's a scene in there where the bishop, the angel, played by Cary Grant, right? You know, no, I guess it's just the angel and the bishop's wife herself. Okay, this was the one where the bishop's not in there, are in a taxi, right? And they're driving, and the taxi driver's talking to him, right? And he turns around and he's talking to them. They're in the back. He's talking to them, and there's a car that's coming, right? You know, and all of a sudden the angel, you know, kind of reaches up, taps him on the shoulder. He turns around, sees the car, you know, and gets out of the way. And he goes, "Wow, did you see how I avoided that? You know, that truck, right? You know." And Cary Grant as the angel says, "Yeah, but don't overplay your hand, right? Understand that's grace, right? You know, it wasn't your time to go. Anyway, disorientation to grace." Self-righteousness, etc. Okay? Of course, we understand that arrogance is one of the spheres of the cosmic system. We have arrogance complex and the hatred complex. Okay? And God, of course, is directly against that. And that's why we have the makes war on. And I'm going to go ahead and bite the bullet. Let's go ahead and add it so that we make sure that we have it. Okay? So, and also remember that the arrogance complex butts right up against the hatred complex. And so it's very easy to go from being arrogant to actually going into the hatred complex and having everything associated with the truth of the Word of God being something that you dislike and hate. Okay, you're arrogant long enough, think you're great long enough. When someone tells you, you know what, God's a little bit better than you are, you have this hatred associated with it. Don't tell me that. I don't want to hear anything like that. We have a society, and I won't get super political today, but we have a society that's going that way. Anything Christian has got to be wrong, right? Anything scientific has got to be wrong, unless of course they want to interpret it as their science. And so what's happening is they're taking and trying to get rid of Christianity throughout the country, and they're trying to replace it with God government, with their religion of politics, right? With their religion that's associated with the government can do everything for you. You can't do anything for yourself. You're either born privileged or not privileged, and you can't change it. There isn't anything you can do for yourself, despite the fact that you have people of one race that are considered privileged that are living in the gutter, and you have other people from other races who have made fantastic examples of themselves and have done great things. But no, that doesn't work. But anyway, that's going from arrogance to hatred. There is going to develop a hatred out there for us. It was interesting. I got to say it. I'm sorry. I started it. I got to say it. There was an article yesterday that I read, okay, about a judge that refused to issue a restraining order that this church was trying to, this university that's a Christian university, was trying to sue the HUD, okay, over their new interpretation of the laws that would imply that in a dormitory, if a person identifies themselves as female, they can be in the female dorm, right? Because you can't discriminate not only on gender, but on gender identity now. And so this church was suing, and the judge went on the side of the state and said, no, church, not church, excuse me, Christian university, because they have segregated, dormitories, and they don't want guys that say they're girls in their girls' dormitory, and vice versa. Well, that's probably usually a different case, but anyway, and they lost the suit, at least temporarily. They're going to continue to fight, okay? But that's where we've gotten to, okay? Subpoint C. So that was the first half. First half was negative. Subpoint C. Then the second half of the distich is the positive statement. Or the antithesis. Quote, he, capital H, gives grace then we have emphatic, so the rest of it's underlined, to the genuinely humble ones. And genuinely is in pairs with two lines through it, and ones is in pairs with two lines through it. Grace to the genuinely humble ones. And that to the genuinely humble ones is underlined, period, end quote. And so note here that what's emphasized in both cases is the individual. Okay? A God makes war on, and then the cause is this individual who's arrogant, but he gives grace to, and the cause is the individual is humble. And so the emphasis is on, and this is why Peter quotes it, because he's talking about humbling yourselves. The emphasis on what are you yourself going to do? God doesn't just come down and discipline you for the heck of it. He's not one of those kinds of fathers, loves to see pain, is going to, let's see what happens with this guy. Whack, 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 whack. Right? Or I knew an individual that said one time, he openly said it, that every now and then I just go over and I smack my son on the head because I know he's done something wrong, I just don't know what it is. That's not quite right. It's probably true, but not quite right. So here we have the fact that it's the individuals themselves that determine whether they're going to get grace or they're going to be made war upon. Okay? So that's why those are emphasized. Continuing the point. For the distich to work, you have to have like things being contrasted, period. So just to be silly, you can't have an antithetic distinction that talks about apples and the second thing talks about oranges, okay? It won't work. You'd have to talk about ripe apples and rotten apples or something like that. Thus, comma, because arrogance is a mental attitude sin, we know that genuine humility must also be a mental state. The ones who are genuinely humble possess a mental attitude that is antithetical to arrogance, which is grace orientation. At least when you leave today, you've had two weeks worth of understanding that genuine humility has to do with grace orientation. It doesn't have to do with being, oh gosh, me, shucks. Okay? So the idea is that God keeps on providing grace to those who are grace oriented. And it's a snowball effect. We're going to see that in the next verse. But the idea is that you have this snowball effect. You have grace being given to you so that you can get doctrine, so that you can learn, okay, so that you can be grace oriented, so that you can have more grace, so that you can continue to learn, and you can have, and it keeps going like that, right? And so it feeds upon itself. And when you break that chain and become arrogant, then that's when things start to fall apart. And if you don't rebound, get yourself back into the divine dynasphere, an area where grace can be given to you, then that whole chain starts to unravel. And just like a ball of yarn that a cat pulls on, right? It's just going to come right down to nothing pretty soon if he keeps running with it. Okay, so Melissa and I had a little cat one time that we had left for the day, and the cat was by itself, and we came home, and there was toilet paper strung from one end of the house to the other. Okay, the cat liked it. It would go like this, would get the toilet paper rolling, and then would stick it in its mouth and run down the hall, right? And we came home, and someone had TP'd the inside of our house, right? And it was our cat looking at us like, what? No. You can see the cat going, it was the dog. It was the dog. Okay. Point 11. So this verse is telling us to get doctrine in your soul by submitting to your right pastor and then together everyone develop the mental attitude of genuine humility or grace orientation. That is how you get blessing. And don't forget, by the way, this is an imperative, so it's a command. It's not a suggestion, it's a command. We all understand what happens when you don't fulfill a command. That's in the Bible. That's called a sin. So, all together, I didn't put it all together. We'll go back up. all together. We have likewise, ye youngers, that's members of the congregation, subordinate yourself to the elders. However, all of you, with reference to one another, clothe yourselves with the genuine humility. Because, and we have Proverbs 3:34, the God is opposed, and now we have slant makes war on, the arrogant ones, but he gives grace to the genuinely humble ones. And that leaves us ready for verse 6, which is where we're going to pick it up in our second class. I get through all of this here. Okay. As always, we finish our first class with true spiritual giving. Okay, true spiritual giving. We have the timetable and the concept given to us, dictated to us in the Bible. It's 1 Corinthians 16:2. On the first day of every week, that's Sunday, the day of resurrection. Let each one give according to his own judgment. And that's emphasized. You have to decide according to his own judgment, be putting aside and saving according to how he might be prospering. And the key word here is prosperity. If you have prosperity, you're supposed to understand where that prosperity comes from and be able to exhale back a portion to the source of that prosperity. If you don't have prosperity, then you don't. We have the principle and prohibition. Each one should give just as he himself has decided what is the right amount in his heart's right lobe. Not out from sorrow, pain, distress, reluctance, and that's related to personal loss of funds. In other words, you don't say, well, gee, if I give, then I'm not going to be able to get that Maserati that I was looking at, right? And I really wanted that Maserati, so maybe I'll just wait a little bit. Okay, that's related to personal loss of funds. Okay, nor out from compulsion, that's pressure, and that's you don't give because someone comes beating on your door and says, by the way, it's time to give, right? Like I said, from my old Italian background, nice house you have there. I hate to see anything happen to it, right? That's external pressure. For you see, the God keeps on loving a cheerful, satisfied giver, and that, of course, means you're in the divine dynasty, functioning properly. Then we have a dictate and a promise in the Old Testament: honor the Lord. Remember, you're not honoring yourself; you're honoring the Lord. It's a memorial to God. Honor the Lord from your prosperity, from the first of all your income. And if you do, your storehouses shall be filled with superabundance, and your vat shall overflow with new wine. That's a way of telling you that if you function properly with the capacities that you have, you're demonstrating that you can handle more and greater prosperity, and God will always supply more and greater prosperity to allow you to continue to grow. Okay? That does not mean that God is telling you, dig deep, give sacrificially, and he will repay you with more. That is not what that means. Okay? And then we have doctrine as a true wealth, plus a warning. 2 Corinthians 8:12 says, for you see, if the eagerness, willingness, readiness, and that's positive volition, is present, this is perfectly acceptable to the degree that he might be having. That's emphasized. It is not, and then we have the antithesis, perfectly acceptable. And so we have to have the same ellipsis brought down, to the degree that he is not having. The idea of give sacrificially, you're destroying the whole concept, because it's supposed to be based on your prosperity. And you don't have prosperity if you're given sacrificially, and God knows what you have. But the one thing that you can always do is you can always give the doctrine, give back your understanding and a portion of the doctrine that you've received toward God. And so we have that. And then we have God's ability to supply prosperity. Suppose you do want to give in the temple area and you haven't been prospered, you can go to God and pray. And if you pray effectively, your prayers will be answered. That doesn't mean that it's always a yes answer. Your prayer may be answered with a no answer, and God doesn't give you prosperity. If he doesn't give you prosperity, then you know it's not part of God's plan for your life right now to be able to give in the temple area. But if he does give you prosperity, then you know, hey, that prosperity that I prayed for so that I could give, I received it, therefore I should stack away and buy that Maserati. No, I should give, right? So we have that from this verse. Now, the God keeps on being manifestly able to richly provide all grace to you, in order that while always having complete self-sufficiency in everything, you all might be providing richly to every divine good work / production. We're going to go ahead now and give you the opportunity to go to God in prayer and exhale back to him a portion of what you received from him, your attitude towards the doctrine, and your understanding and information associated with that doctrine. And then we're also going to pass the container around so that if you have been prospered in the temporal area and you've decided to give, you have the opportunity to do that as well. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to come back to you and be able to exhale back to you a portion of what we receive from you. Of course, starting off with the fact that we understand what you've provided for us by the person and work of your Son, the fact that you gave, gave him so that we could have salvation. And you didn't stop by just giving us salvation. You gave us everything necessary to go from being a baby believer to being an adolescent believer and finally a mature believer. You're giving us grace along the way, giving us doctrine so that we can cycle it into our soul and continue to grow even past maturity, okay, and be able to function properly a maximum amount of the time and have fantastic blessings in time while also storing up above and beyond blessings in eternity. And for that, we are truly grateful, and we pray in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, if you'll stand, we're going to sing, making a joyful